Good afternoon, BookTube. You join me once again for a roundup of my recent reading. First up is Republic by Alice Hunt, which is a capacious, almost 400-page general history of the 1650s, that tumultuous decade where the English people took it upon themselves to cut off the head of their king, to install a republic, and later a Lord Protector in the form of Oliver Cromwell, who launched his military coup in 1653 against the Rump Parliament and ruled as a quasi-king for the next 5 years, and was succeeded in monarchical fashion by his luckless son Richard, who was deposed by the same army which had brought his father to power, which then proceeded to restore the old republic, which in its turn then collapsed and was replaced by a restored monarchy in 1660. So, that is an account, a succinct account of the very dizzying period that was 1649 to 1660. And what can I say? I've been struggling for an angle to take on this book, and I've actually written a review of it for Steve Donahue, a review I pored over for a while because I wasn't sure exactly what angle to take on it. That review should appear on Open Letters Review at some point, hopefully. But it was difficult to do justice to this book in 800 words. It's a very readable, very briskly paced, well-written account of the period, and it supplements the other books that have been written about this period in recent years. There was Anna Kay's book, The Restless Republic, that came out, I believe, in 2022. There was also Paul Lay's book on Cromwell's protectorate called Providence Lost that came out in 2020, a little while before then. So over the last few years, there has definitely been a resurgence of interest, just based on the titles we're seeing being published. And this is the latest one. It is a solid account. It goes over familiar ground. There isn't a huge amount that's new or groundbreaking, but the one thing that's quite novel about what Alice Hunt does is she has a very different focus to a lot of the other histories that have been written on this period. She writes more about the cultural developments that were happening during this time, especially in the realm of science. We meet figures like Samuel Hartlib, who was this sort of one-man think tank and master networker, linking all of these different intellectuals and thinkers and scientists and writers and political theorists together. And we meet people like Robert Boyle and Robert Hooke, people such as Robert Boyle's brother, Roger, Lord Broghill, who was not only a pioneer of the novel, but was a close advisor of Oliver Cromwell, and was one of the leading figures pushing Cromwell to actually assume the throne and become King Oliver. And it's a very refreshing perspective on a period that we associate generally with religious radicalism, extremism, with military dictatorship, with the killjoy laws against fun, against gambling, against whoring, against celebrating Christmas, the rule of the major generals, and the black legacy that left, and the black market left on the record of this time and of this regime of Oliver Cromwell. And it's very nicely done. I love the way she uses the sources. She just allows them to speak, and she uses these sources very skillfully to recreate the very noisy, frankly, and very cacophonous atmosphere of that time, in which everyone seemed to have an opinion on everything. And it's a very confusing period in our history, a period of English history that has been obscured because of the Restoration, and because the Restoration regime sought to bury the horrid legacy of Cromwell and his Puritans and sought to sweep the whole Republican period under a rug. And what Alice Hunt does is she recaptures a lot of what was actually good about this period. It wasn't all doom and gloom. There was some good stuff happening. Just in the realm of science alone, for example, we can see in figures such as Robert Boyle and Robert Hooke and John Wilkins the foundations of what later became the Enlightenment. And these figures formed what was known as the Oxford Experimental Philosophy Society, which later became the Royal Society under Charles II, and went on to pioneer all sorts of fascinating and exciting scientific study and innovation of all sorts. So this wasn't just doom and gloom. This wasn't just a period of Puritanism and melancholy and famine and warfare. There was also a much brighter aspect to this period which should not be overlooked, and I think that Alice Hunt does a good job of reclaiming that aspect of the years of the Interregnum. Thomas Hobbes, in particular, the famous author of Leviathan, appears in this book, and he's a much more colourful figure than his reputation as this theorist of absolute monarchy would suggest. So I quite enjoyed reading about him. There is a very detailed account of the lead up to the return of the Jews to England and the debates around that, and the role that Cromwell himself played in all of that. There's a lot of detail on that in here, which I really enjoyed reading about. In order to put this book in context, I actually read two other books that have come out recently that I've just mentioned in this video. I read Anna Kay's book, The Restless Republic, which is also a fantastic book. I actually enjoyed it slightly more, I would say, than Alice Hunt's book. It's just a fantastic reading experience. Her approach is very different. So she, like Hunt, she has this broad historical narrative that she's trying to get across, but she retells the story through these key individuals, and she gives you their whole biography, all of the details of their life and their times and of the experiences they had that shaped them. People like John Bradshaw, who was the president of the court that sentenced Charles I to death, Anna Chapnell, the fifth monarchist sightseer, who saw all these visions of apocalypse. You have figures such as the Derby family, and who are royalists, and what they got up to during this period. The Lestrange family, also royalists, who are also portrayed rather sympathetically. It's just a really, really riveting read, and a fantastic reading experience. And some of the stuff that's in here is actually more detailed than in Alice Hunt's version, because Alice Hunt is trying to do, I think, a more broad brush approach to this period. So Anna Kay has more detail on things such as the Irish settlement and what went on in Ireland during this time, and the role that William Petty, the famous economist and cartographer, played in all of this. So I would say that Anna Kay is the superior writer and storyteller, but Alice Hunt's book is still very good for those who just want a readable general history. And if you want some more detail on key figures, then Anna Kay's book is better. If you want a book that focuses specifically on the Protectorate, then Paul Lay's book is better. His is a narrower study. Its focus is purely on 1653 to 1659, and those 6 years or so in which the Protectorate existed under Oliver and Richard. There's a lot of detail here on the Western design to conquer Hispaniola, that's modern-day Haiti and the Dominican Republic, from Spain, its failure and how that played into Cromwell's decision that England had disobeyed God, that it had to win back God's favor, and that the way to do it was to impose a rigid military regime in the form of the major generals and their subsequent campaign against sinful pleasures such as drinking alcohol in ale houses and things such as that. Very, very good, very readable account. So that's better in terms of if you want a history exclusively about the Protectorate. But Alice Hunt's book is good. Again, as I said it before, it's not groundbreaking, particularly, but it does have a slightly different angle on things. Anna Kay's book is probably the more riveting read, but Alice Hunt's book is still good. So I recommend it. You have this lovely picture of Oliver Cromwell on horseback in the front. Alice Hunt does a good job of balancing between talking about Cromwell in a lot of detail, because he was important to this period, but not allowing him to dominate the narrative. So she has a lot in here about all sorts of stuff that wasn't just tied to Cromwell as an individual. One shortcoming of this book is I wish there were more illustrations, more color illustrations. There are quite a few black and white illustrations, but there are no color illustrations. There are no white inset pages that you might get in most other history books, for example, which is annoying because there are quite a few times in this book where she mentions the odd portrait of Cromwell, and you have to go Googling it instead of being able to find it in the book, because she only has black and white books in here. Now, she does have a bibliography, which is more than a lot of contemporary histories do have, so that's good. For some strange reason, it could just be expense, the expense of the additional pages. A lot of these books don't have a bibliography anymore, and Steve Donoghue has gone into great detail about his frustration at this phenomenon that's cropped up. It's unacceptable, really. There should always be, in scholarly works of this kind, a bibliography. So this book does have that. It has a lengthy index as well, and I believe it also has notes. Yes, so there are notes, bibliography, index, the whole hog, really, but no color illustrations. And they were probably, I think the probable reason for that is just the expense. I think including color illustrations on top of everything else that's in here would have made the book more expensive, and as a result of that, I think they chose not to include them, which is unfortunate. So this is published by Faber and Faber. They were kind enough to send me a review copy, so thank you very much, Faber and Faber, for sending me a copy of this to review, and hopefully a review of it under my name will be appearing on Open Letters Review soon. So that's all of the reading I've been doing this week, more or less. I've just spent the whole of this week reading these 3 books about the 1650s, and trying to fit that in with a very busy work schedule. And I'm somehow managing it. So if I am not able to maintain the pace of reading, then you know why. It's because I have a very, very busy work schedule at the moment, and I'm trying to fit all of this reading in. I'm somehow managing it. Now, I've started reading John Henry Newman's Apologia Pro Vita Sua. Well, I've not actually started reading the book proper. I'm still on the introduction by this man called Ian Kerr, who I believe was a Roman Catholic apologist, if that's the correct term to use, apologist, writer. I don't remember whether he was actually a clergyman or not. I don't remember, but he passed away some years ago. Although he provides this very generous introduction to the book. Is there any info on him? Just so I can get my facts straight. Yes, Ian Kerr. So he is, well, he was alive when this was being written, but he was, at the time of writing, a theologian who taught theology at Oxford, and he is the person who has written the introduction for this copy of John Henry Newman's Apologia Pro Vita Sua, and this will be the way I close off Victober. So, as I've said before, John Henry Newman was the celebrated Victorian uh, priest, formerly an Anglican, who made this dramatic conversion to Catholicism that shocked his contemporaries, and for which he was sharply attacked by this very prim and proper Victorian Protestant called Charles Kingsley. And in response to that, John Newman decided he would write an autobiography explaining why he chose to desert the Anglican Church. So this is essentially his theological autobiography in which he goes over the history of his gradual evolution towards Catholicism. And I'm really looking forward to reading it on the back of having read Dermot McCulloch's fantastic book about the history of Christianity. I think that this will be a very enjoyable, very informative read about a man who is still very influential in the Catholic Church today, still revered. He was recently made a saint, and there he is on the front cover in his cardinal's outfit, looking very fetching, very wizened, looking very world-weary, as a saint should be. But as someone who was brought up Protestant, and not just any kind of Protestant, I was brought up Pentecostal. So Pentecostalism is a descendant of evangelical Protestantism of the 19th century, especially Methodism. Uh, John Henry Newman came from a similar background. He came from an evangelical background, although very much within the Anglican Church. And he rebelled against this low church upbringing and became progressively high church as he got older, until in his middle age he had a crisis of faith in the Anglican Church, and he dramatically deconverted from his high church Anglicanism and became a Catholic. This did not happen overnight. It was a gradual transition, but it was still fairly dramatic for someone who certainly in his early life had been such a staunch Protestant and detested Catholicism with a deep passion. It's very difficult to get across to those who aren't British the extent to which anti-Catholicism is ingrained in British culture and British history. Until very recently, even in parts of the country, like Northern Ireland, you still have this deep and bitter division between Catholic and Protestant. So this isn't ancient history. This is something integral to the nature of our national life, and Cardinal Newman was on the fault lines of that division. And just to give you some more context, the Victorian period saw a resurgence in Catholicism. It saw a revival, a renaissance of the kind of Catholic ritual and practice and belief that had lain dormant for a long time, and Newman was part of that trend within the Anglican Church towards a more Catholic-leaning position. Now, he did what many of his contemporaries didn't do, and he went all the way to becoming a Catholic. Many of them remained Anglican, but just in a very high church direction. So they weren't willing to go all the way to adopting Catholicism and embracing the Pope and all of that, but they nevertheless challenged a lot of the more dogmatic more purist aspects of Protestantism that they saw in the church. So Newman was just part of that growing trend. He is the most famous example of it. And I look forward to reading about his journey, about his spiritual development. I doubt I will become Catholic on the basis of it, but I certainly want to read more about his life and about his thought and how he became what he became. So that is John Henry Newman's Apologia Pro Vita Sua. That is all I have to say. Like and subscribe if you enjoy these kinds of updates on my reading life, and I hope to talk to you all again soon. Bye for now, BookTube.